To memorize long lists of information, memory athletes use techniques like the method, where numbers or facts are translated into visual images and associated with familiar places to enhance recall. Katie Kermode, a memory athlete and world record holder, recently spoke with Big Think about the particular ways she uses mnemonic techniques in competitions. Although inherent ability likely plays some role in memory abilities, learning to boost your memory skills is easier than you might think. Who holds for world records in memory championships?
To memorize numbers, for example, Kermode uses the bend system, in which each digit represents a particular consonant or vowel sound. These form words when combined, convert numbers into mental images. The brain has a much easier time recalling images over words, a phenomenon known as the picture superiority effect. Numbers are just hard to remember naturally. She was able to easily recall license plates, phone numbers. Kermode competed in her first memory competition, landing a world record for memorizing 84 unfamiliar names and faces in 5 minutes.
While further testing is necessary, this memory prosthesis technology could represent a breakthrough for patients with memory disorders. For these people, a 15% or 20% improvement in the ability to remember could slow the progress of their conditions, potentially helping them hold on to their precious memories. He was a weak and ineffective leader, draining the palace coffers with his whims and losing territory to other powers. He was overthrown and executed, after his atrocities became too much for religious and military authorities of the empire to tolerate.
One of his women had been defiled. Ibrahim was furious. He had his chief black eunuch investigate. He had women tortured. Machiavellian power struggle between siblings. One need not be a clinical psychologist to imagine the damage 2 decades of solitary confinement would do to a person. Ibrahim was not only isolated, but he also lived under constant fear for his life, which was hugely expensive and distracted his armies when they were already overstretched. In fact, some historians have argued that the stories violate one of the most notorious and terrible rulers.
Music has the potential to be more beautiful and horrifying than any other art form. Scarier than horror movie soundtracks are compositions inspired by history's greatest tragedies. Talented composers can impart a sense of unutterable joy and also evoke indescribable fear. Bernard Herrmann used stinger chords, produced by violinists playing sharp tones whose rough texture matches that of a human scream and activates the same mechanisms in brain. The terrifying scores of genre-defining horror movies combine sound masses with tone clusters to create overwhelming,
The composition explores multiple interpretations of the abbreviation WTC. Reich samples the voices of women performing Shmira, a traditional Jewish practice in which the living watch over the bodies of the deceased while reciting psalms and biblical passages. One practical and one spiritual, to protect the bodies from animals and insects and to accompany the soul until burial. The voices of the women who accompanied the victims of a process that lasted 7 months due to difficulties in DNA identification can be heard in the composition's third movement.
The Paraline, a biocompatible USP Class 6 polymer neural probe, sports an electrode array for detecting and ultimately reproducing electrical firing patterns in the hippocampus. USC implanted their device in the brains of 20 volunteers who were already having electrodes implanted in their brains for the treatment of epilepsy. The implants recorded neuronal activity in each subject's hippocampus during the test, allowing researchers to discern the electrical stimulation patterns associated with the memory tasks. If only for its cultural impact, is the unforgettable theme.
Study published in Neuron supports this idea, noting that high-level memory abilities do not seem to be associated with extraordinary brain anatomy or general cognitive superiority, but they are acquired through deliberate training in mnemonic strategies. Kermode believes natural advantage is not a factor to be ignored, in part because she hopes researchers will continue to study the mechanisms behind memory. Kermode, who works as a software developer in England and created the memorization and recall software used at IAM World Memory Championships and other competitions.
You won't have to visualize the snake in their house. Kermode said other competitors use different variations. That's something that's not quite the method of loci, but it essentially is. Kermode said words and numbers can also spark visualizations and other perceptions completely organically, without any intention or prior training. This seems to be a product of synesthesia, the perceptual phenomenon that blends the senses in unusual ways, such as seeing colors when hearing music. Kermode noted that there's a big push in the memory sports world to emphasize
Also called the memory palace technique, the method of loci was developed by the ancient Greek polymath Simonides of CEOs, who narrowly avoided being crushed to death by a building collapse during a dinner party. Simonides came up with the technique after finding he was able to identify the dead by thinking about where each person was seated at the banquet. Spatial location, he realized, is a powerful memory aid. Big Think interviewed the English illusionist Darren Brown about how he uses the technique in his performances to count cards and do other tricks.